All right, so picture this. You're trapped. A Nazi POW camp. Stalag Luft III. Smack dab in the middle of Poland. And get this, built for, well, guys like you, Allied Air Force officers. And the Germans. Oh, they think it's escape-proof. So what would you do? Just sit there and wait. Or try for the impossible.
Well, the guys at Stalag Luft III, they weren't really known for just sitting around. They had this burning need for freedom, even though things weren't exactly, brutal. They had a library, a theater, even a pool, not your typical POW camp.
Yeah, you'd think all those comforts would make them, I don't know, complacent. But no, they came up with this crazy plan, the Great Escape. Talk about human ingenuity, right? And a whole lot of guts.
It's the scale of it that really gets me. We're talking over 600 prisoners, digging 3 tunnels, all at the same time, Tom, Dick, and Harry, each one with its own challenges and, engineering feats.
And they had to be sneaky, right? I mean, surrounded by guards.
Yeah.
Ferrets, whose whole job was to stop escapes.
Oh, absolutely. They had this crazy system for getting rid of the sand. Called it the penguin method. Can you imagine it? Guys waddling around with bags of sand under their coats, spreading it around so no one would notice.
That's brilliant. But wait, there's more. They even had a watch system to keep an eye on those ferrets. Signal when it was safe to dig. It was a constant game of cat and mouse. Incredible coordination.
Yeah.
And trust.
And don't forget the work involved. Digging with, whatever they could find. Spoons, bedboards, even sharpened tin cans. The sheer determination is mind-blowing.
Determination. Yeah, that brings us to Tunnel Harry, the star of the show. Over 111 meters long. A highway to freedom.
Harry was amazing. Unstable soil, risk of cave-ins, and the constant fear of getting caught. They even built a rail system with carts to move the gear faster. Now that's dedication.
All while trying to act normal. Right. Attending roll calls, doing activities, and secretly chipping away at their escape route. The discipline and the mental strength.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's unbelievable. And remember, they weren't just digging a hole. They were planning for life outside. Civilian clothes, forged documents, compasses, maps, everything.
So how did they get all that stuff? In a high-security POW camp? Some kind of underground smuggling ring?
You could say that. They were masters of making do. Bartering with guards who were sympathetic, trading chocolate and coffee, which were like gold during the war. They even had forgers in the camp, making fake documents that looked real.
Wow, a mini society inside the camp. Their own economy, specialized skills. Amazing how they adapted and actually thrived.
Adaptability was key. To surviving, physically and mentally, they knew hope was a powerful thing, and they held on to it.
Okay, so we've got the tunnel, escape kits, hundreds of prisoners ready to go. Take us to that night, March 24th, 1944. The escape. What was the plan? How did it all go down?
It was a detailed plan. Every man had a role and escape route. They prioritized the guys with language skills, survival instincts, those with the best chance.
So it wasn't just like a random free-for-all. They were strategic, which makes sense considering everything.
Exactly. They're thinking long-term. Even if only a few made it, it would be a huge blow to the Germans and a boost to Allied morale.
Right, the scene is set. The night of the escape. What happened?
Well, even with all the planning, things didn't go perfectly. Right away, a big problem. A jammed exit hatch.
Are you serious? All that work and they're stuck because of a hatch.
Imagine the tension. They lost precious time, darkness, trying to get it open. Talk about a close call.
I bet. They had a tight schedule. Back in the barracks by roll call, where the whole thing's busted.
Right. And to make things worse, the exit wasn't where they thought it would be. It was in no man's land, a clearing past the trees, totally exposed. Every sound could have been the end.
Sitting ducks. How did they not get caught?
They had a rope tug system. Running from the exit back down the tunnel, someone at the top would tug it to warn the others about guards. A high-stakes game of red light, green light.
Okay, so jammed hatch, exposed exit, but some did get out, right?
Yeah, 76 men made it out. Into the night. Courage and determination for sure, but their freedom was short-lived.
And here's where it gets interesting. Heartbreaking, actually. What happened? Did they all get caught?
Well, just before dawn, the escape was discovered. A huge manhunt started. The Germans were furious, a challenge to their authority, an embarrassment. They sent thousands of troops, Gestapo agents, to track down the escapees.
So the entire Nazi machine was after them. What chance did they have?
Not much, I'm afraid. Escaping through occupied Europe was hard enough, but with the Gestapo on their trail, it was almost impossible.
This is where the story takes a dark turn. What happened to those men who risked it all for freedom?
Of the 76, only 3 made it to freedom. The rest were recaptured. And the Gestapo, in a brutal act of revenge, executed 50 of them.
50? That's awful. They were prisoners of war, not criminals. Were there any consequences for this?
Absolutely. It was a war crime. The Gestapo tried to cover it up, saying they were shot trying to escape. But after the war, investigations showed the truth. And those responsible were held accountable at the Nuremberg trials.
So the Great Escape, it's not just about a prison break. It's about war and the cost of defiance.
Exactly. It's a story of ingenuity, courage, betrayal, and a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked.
We've talked about a lot. The planning, the escape, the tragedy. But what about the legacy of the Great Escape? What makes this story still matter all these years later?
That's a great question. The Great Escape, it wasn't just a historical event. It shows us the human spirit's need for freedom that never gives up. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about the fate of those recaptured. It's important to remember, these weren't just like numbers. These were people, each with their own story, their own hopes for freedom.
Yeah, you're right. And it makes what the Gestapo did even worse. When you think about the men behind those numbers, like Roger Bushell, the guy who basically planned the whole escape, a South African-born British lawyer. Can you believe it? Organizing something this complex.
Bushell's story is wild. He was known as Big X in the camp, a leader, really smart and just so determined. He'd already escaped from another camp earlier in the war, so the Germans, they knew he was trouble.
A repeat offender, a real pain for the Luftwaffe. No wonder they saw him as a threat.
Exactly. And tragically, he was one of the 50 executed by the Gestapo. It just shows the brutality they faced, even after all those years as prisoners.
It's just heartbreaking. And it wasn't just Bushell. There were so many others, like Bernard Scheidhauer, an American pilot. He planned his escape route so carefully, hoping to reach Switzerland.
Scheidhauer's story shows just how far these men were willing to go. He spent months studying maps, learning German, gathering any info he could to improve his chances.
He even got civilian clothes, forged documents. Right under the guards' noses. Talk about dedication.
Incredible. And it shows these weren't just desperate acts. They were calculated plans, driven by this deep need for freedom.
So they weren't just hoping for a lucky break. They were taking control, even when things seemed impossible.
That's it. And their stories, they make you think. How would we react in that same situation? What would we risk for freedom?
It's a question that makes you really think about what's important, your own limits. And it makes what the Gestapo did even more horrible. They tricked these men, many of them injured, promising to take them back to Stalag Luft III, and then just executed them.
It was a complete violation of the Geneva Conventions, an act of terror.
Yes.
To break their spirits and stop any more escapes.
But there were still glimmers of hope, even in all that darkness. The Swiss inspector at Stalag Luft III, for example, he knew something was wrong when he heard the Nazis' official story.
Oh, yeah, he didn't believe the propaganda for a second. And he reported his suspicions to the British government. His actions were crucial in exposing the truth.
Yeah.
And bringing those responsible to justice.
So even in a system as bad as the Nazi regime, there were people who still had some humanity, their sense of right and wrong. It reminds us that even in the darkest times, we have a choice.
Absolutely. And those choices, those acts of defiance, even small ones, can make a difference, contribute to a larger movement for justice.
The Great Escape, it wasn't just about the physical act of getting out. It was about refusing to be broken, believing they could still control their own lives.
It was a victory in a way, a testament to their resilience, their ingenuity, their hope, and that spirit still resonates today. The story of the Great Escape, it's been told and retold in books, movies, documentaries. It's captivating audiences for generations.
Why do you think that is? Why does this story still have so much power? What is it about the Great Escape that speaks to us so deeply?
I think it's the themes, courage, sacrifice, the pursuit of freedom. It reminds us that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can still shine through. The prisoners at Stalag Luft III, they may not have all gotten away, but their actions, they remind us that the desire for freedom, for a better world, it can never truly be extinguished.
It's a story that goes beyond time and place. It reminds us that the fight for freedom is never really over, and that we all have a part to play in protecting that. But, like we said, the escape, it was just one part of these men's lives. Their experiences before and after Stalag Luft III, they're just as interesting.
And that's where we'll pick up after the break. We'll look at their backgrounds, how they got to Stalag Luft III, and what happened to them after the war. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Before we were about to, dive into the lives of these guys, before and after Stalag Luft III, it wasn't just like a bunch of British guys trying to get out, right?
Right, you got it. The Great Escape crew, it was a real mix. Brits, Canadians, Americans, Poles, Norwegians, even Aussies, all wanting freedom. And, not big fans of the Nazis, obviously.
It's crazy to think how they all ended up in that camp. I mean, they weren't all like Top Gun pilots, were they?
No, not even close. Some were, barely out of training when they got shot down. And their backgrounds, you name it. Some were rich, some were, not so much. Farmers, teachers, lawyers, even artists, a real mix.
So all these differences,
Yep.
but they end up in this crazy situation, forming bonds that went beyond where they came from or their social class.
Exactly. They had each other's backs. Support, encouragement, the strength to keep going when things were rough. That camaraderie, that was everything for survival, physically and mentally.
One story that really stuck with me, Wally Floody, the Canadian pilot, he helped design the tunnel. And get this, he was a mining engineer before the war.
Mm-hmm.
What are the chances, right? Having someone like that in a POW camp.
Floody's story is something else. The power of, being in the right place at the right time and how skills you wouldn't think matter suddenly become crucial. His knowledge of tunnels, ventilation, all that stuff, it was key to making the escape work. He was meant to be there.
And even after he was caught, sent to another camp, he didn't give up, kept planning escapes. Shows you that spirit, that resistance can't be locked up.
Yeah, that defiance, it was in all of them. They wouldn't let being prisoners break them. They put on plays, gave lectures, even started a university in the camp, all while planning their escape.
It's amazing creating a sense of normalcy in that situation. A purpose. They weren't just getting by, they were living.
That's it. They knew hope was powerful, a weapon against despair, and they held on to it. Which brings us back to, that question from before. Knowing the risks, the likely outcome, would you have tried to escape?
It's a tough one. Weighing freedom against, probably getting caught, maybe even dying. What about you? Would you have taken that chance?
It's hard to say unless you've been there, but I think the Great Escape shows us, the human spirit. It's resilient, it has hope, it wants freedom no matter what. Those men, they weren't just escaping a prison, they were fighting for something bigger, a symbol against tyranny, showing the power of the human will.
And that message, it still means something today. The Great Escape, it's not just history. It makes us think about what we believe in, what we'd be willing to risk for it.
Yeah, it reminds us freedom's precious, worth fighting for. And even when things are dark, the human spirit, it can always find a way to shine.
What we've talked about a lot today, the planning, the escape, the tragedy, the legacy. The Great Escape, it's a story that's fascinated people for generations. It inspires us with its courage, ingenuity, and that endless pursuit of freedom.
And as we wrap up, I hope you listening walk away with not just knowing about this incredible event, but also, appreciating freedom and remembering those who came before us and what they sacrificed to give us that freedom.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.